4 centuries ago, a man with a torch for symbols wrote images that still haunt the present: a return, a lion, an eagle under trial, flames that reveal what was hidden. Read through the frame of his quatrains, and some interpreters see a single year singled out, a hinge, a doorway, 2026. Read through the frame of our headline: Nostradamus warned, Trump's unbelievable destiny for 2026. And a portrait emerges not as fate etched in stone, but as a set of possibilities pressing on the present. What follows is an interpretation, one voice trying to trace meaning from old metaphors into modern trouble and hope. Take it as suggestion, not decree. The image is cinematic, a leader who reappears as if a curtain has been pulled back, the lion, proud and dangerous, pacing at the gates, the eagle overhead, wings strained, 3 brothers, siblings of power, locked in tension, and fire, not only as destruction but as light that uncovers. Those are the raw symbols. We live in a moment where symbols shape behavior. Symbols become narratives that people live by. If Nostradamus wrote about such scenes, interpreters read them to ask, what if this is about a returning dominant figure, an archetypal lion, and a nation symbolized by the eagle facing a decisive year? What might that mean for 2026, and for those of us who will live through it? Before we go further, a brief note. What I offer here is interpretive. I do not claim absolute proof, nor do I ask you to accept any reading as final. The quatrains lend themselves to many eyes. What matters is how we respond. If you want deeper analysis and more of this kind of perspective, take a moment to like and subscribe so this conversation can continue. Among those who study prophetic verse, a handful of quatrains recur in readings aimed at our time. One passage, often paraphrased, speaks of a leader who returns to influence the great city, a figure whose resurgence stirs both loyalty and fury. Interpreters read that image as the lion returning to the place of power, a symbol of ego, dominance, and a style of leadership that refuses compromise. In modern mapping, that lion is often linked by image and energy to the man who embodies theatrical strength and polarizing charisma in contemporary American politics. The quatrain does not name names. It offers a tableau of re-emergence and the social tremors that follow. Another quatrain in common readings sets a lion against an eagle, 2 beasts that are not merely animals but archetypes. The eagle flies, scout and sovereign. The lion rules the ground with roar and paw. Interpreters say this could be a metaphor for a leader whose force collides with a larger national identity, or for a struggle in which personal power tests collective institutions. Read this way: the eagle is the United States' idea, its principles, its narratives, its global posture, while the lion is a strong, prideful force pushing its limits. The image does not predict a single outcome. It names a conflict of energies, the personal and the structural, the image and the institution. A third passage that draws attention speaks of 3 brothers who cry out together, siblings whose quarrel shakes the land. Many readers translate this as the 3 branching powers of a republic: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. The quatrain is vague enough to allow different historical fits, but the symbolic match is striking. Imagine the 3 branches strained to near break. Interpretive readings paint scenes of institutional conflict, legal showdowns, and public tests of constitutional norms. Again, this is possibility talk. It suggests that 2026 could be a year when the architecture of governance is tested on multiple fronts simultaneously. Finally, there is the motif of fire and counterfeits, images some read as a revelation by flame and a critique of false currency. One paraphrase often cited speaks of copies of gold and silver being found false, leading to an upheaval in value and trust. In the modern context, interpreters liken this to the fragility of paper promises, digital credit, and monetary systems under strain. Taken together, these quatrains, leaders return, lion versus Eagle, Three Brothers in Crisis, fire-exposing counterfeit value, offer an interpretive map that points to 2026 as a year of concentrated pressure. If these snippets feel provocative, it is by design. Symbols invite us to ask questions. What follows is not prophecy in the sense of unchangeable destiny, but a language for reading present tensions and weighing choices. To treat these images as instructions would be a mistake. They are mirrors. They can help a people see themselves and decide differently. We need to unpack these images in living terms. First, the lion. Archetypally, the lion stands for power that is visible, proud, and unyielding. It is the leader as spectacle, commanding attention, confident in its vision, ready to rend or to shelter. When a lion re-enters the scene, the crowd reacts. Some flock to the roar, others circle with fear. In political life, a lion figures as a person who refuses the backstage of compromise and chooses the center stage. The energy can be galvanizing, but it also polarizes. It asks of the community, will you form a circle of protection around the lion, or will you find a way to temper its impulse so the pride survives? Across from the lion flies the eagle. The eagle is not merely another powerful creature, it stands for national identity, for a broader vision and a certain aspirational moral grammar. The eagle sees distances, carries banners, and becomes a symbol that people rally to when they imagine themselves as a collective with a story. When an eagle is tested, the story itself is under strain. What is the nation willing to admit it is doing or failing to do? Here the eagle is also the institutions that carry constitutional identity, the public narratives about law and justice. When lion and eagle enter into tension, the spectacle becomes constitutional. The question is not only who wins, but how the rules of common life survive. The Three Brothers image is useful for mapping the possible institutional pressure points. The executive, the legislature, Congress, and the judiciary, the Supreme Court and lower courts, are meant to be a system of counterweights. But a simultaneous strain across all three branches, legally, politically, and symbolically, would create an unusual bottleneck. That does not mean the system collapses automatically. It means the people who live inside it will face a test of resilience. The test is procedural, legal, and cultural all at once. Will the processes hold? Will norms matter? Will choices be made that either stabilize or further fracture trust? Now move to the economic image, the counterfeit gold and silver. Interpreters read this as an image of systems that pretend to hold value, yet are revealed as thin. In contemporary translation, it raises questions about monetary trust, the health of banking systems, the value of currency when under stress, and the social consequences of sudden re-evaluation. It is reasonable to say that financial systems can be exposed, not necessarily in the dramatic collapse scenes of fiction, but in the quiet erosion of purchasing power, in tightened credit, in policies that force difficult reallocations. If a quatrain points to a purge of false value, one reading is that the year could usher in revelations about hidden debts, distorted markets, or forced adjustments that make people rethink what they rely upon. All of this, lion, eagle, Three Brothers, counterfeit, frames two broad timelines. The first timeline is collapse, institutional paralysis, economic pain, heightened polarization, and the erosion of norms leading to social fragmentation. The second timeline is awakening. The same pressures act like a crucible. Fire exposes frauds, pain provokes search, and communities band together to build new webs of mutual support. The same images that threaten can catalyze renewal. That duality is crucial. Prophecy, if we can name it so, often offers at least two doors, one toward death, the other toward rebirth. Which door we pass through will be determined by choices, individual, communal, spiritual, not merely by the arrival of any single leader. You may hear the title and think this is a story about politics alone. It is not. This conversation must remain anchored in ethical clarity. This is not about worshipping leaders. It is about stewardship and responsibility. The Christian tradition, among other moral frameworks, insists that ultimate hope is not tied to any human throne. Use that clarity as a stabilizer. When a figure acts as a lightning rod of loyalty or outrage, you are invited to situate your loyalties under a higher ethic: truth, justice, compassion, and the common good. What might institutional tension look like in practical terms? One plausible scenario, drawn from the symbolic reading, is that 2026 could produce simultaneous legal challenges, contested executive decisions, and legislative gridlock that together create a sense of systemic stalemate. Court rulings might hinge on narrow interpretations. Congress might struggle to act decisively amid competing loyalties. And a popular leader, returned to prominence, could demand deference that shakes norms. This could leave citizens asking, where is authority genuinely anchored? The refrain from interpreters is less theatrical than functional. Expect tests of resilience rather than theatrical collapse. Institutions often bend. They rarely snap in a single year. But pressure points intensify, and pressure calls for civic wisdom. Economic strain would be felt in household budgets and community life more than in abstract market charts. If a system-wide re-evaluation of value takes place, the cloak of counterfeit exposed, people may face shrinking purchasing power, supply chain stress, and difficulty accessing credit. Avoiding hyperbole, the sober counsel is to prepare practical resilience, reduce unnecessary dependencies on fragile single-income streams, learn transferable skills, and cultivate local networks that can provide mutual aid when larger systems slow. Different households will prepare differently. The ethical frame is to prepare with justice in mind, to avoid hoarding, and to seek ways to help neighbors rather than worsen inequality. Social and cultural fragmentation will show up as increased hostility in public discourse, a proliferation of parallel realities where groups inhabit different sets of facts, and an escalation of battles that stop short of outright violence but destabilize civic trust, what some call wars without blood. These conflicts are corrosive because they erode the common ground necessary for democratic life. Yet the symbolic reading offers hope. Those same pressures can force dialogues that previously seemed impossible if people choose the harder route of bridge building rather than wall building. Two timelines then: collapse or awakening. Which is more likely? Both are possible. The ancient quatrains do not operate like a contractual prediction. They operate as an invitation to examine a present and to act. The deciding factor will be the aggregate of small choices, whether citizens amplify rage or model restraint, whether communities hoard or share, whether leaders are idolized or held accountable through civic means. In other words, prophecy points to the pressure. Responsibility answers with action. What does responsible action look like in practical, spiritual, and communal terms? First, cultivate inner steadiness. The lion's roar is seductive. It makes fear and fury into momentum. The spiritual practice required here is not mere stoicism. It is the cultivation of discernment. Learn to pause before amplifying a narrative. Train your attention to notice when a story turns you into a reflexive amplifier of anger. Practices that help include regular silence, prayer or reflection, journaling, and cultivating friendships that challenge your echo chamber. These are not abstractions. They are the muscle memory that prevents small fires from becoming forest infernos. Second, detach identity from political tribes. One of the most destructive dynamics in polarized years is identity fusion with a leader or a party. When personal worth is linked to a political brand, every setback becomes existential and escalation becomes rationalized. The antidote is to center identity in commitments that outlast partisan cycles: family, vocation, neighbor care, moral principles, faith communities. This does not mean apathy. It means refusing to let partisan drama dictate your soul's temperature. Third, build resilient community. The images in the quatrains suggest that the year ahead may be a stress test for networks of mutual aid. Local communities that already have trust and shared resources will fare better. Start or strengthen a neighborhood circle, regular check-ins, shared skills inventories, plans for mutual support in times of shortage. Invest in relational capital rather than solely financial capital. Skills exchange, gardening, basic medical knowledge, carpentry, small-scale food preservation become assets in a stressed environment. Fourth, develop practical skills and financial prudence. This is not about doom prepping and spectacle. It is about responsible stewardship. Diversify income where possible, save prudently, understand your basic household budget, and reduce reliance on single points of failure. Learning to grow some portion of your food, to manage basic repairs, and to navigate local barter or credit networks can keep you flexible. Use wisdom, prepare ethically, avoid fear-driven hoarding, and prioritize solidarity with the vulnerable. Fifth, practice bridge building. Seek conversations across divides with curiosity and humility. This is one of the most dangerous and most neglected practices. You do not need to compromise on convictions to listen. In fact, listening may sharpen them. Approach those who disagree with questions rather than verdicts. Ask what fear or hope motivates them. In the face of symbolic lions and eagles, bridges are the structures that allow people to cross from suspicion to co-responsibility. Sixth, stay engaged in civic processes without making them the sole source of identity. Vote, advocate, and participate in civic life, but hold institutions accountable with the tempering virtues of patience and persistence. Civic engagement done well is long, patient, and sustained, not a feverish sprint. Institutions are fragile, but they are also resilient when citizens care for them consistently. We must also wrestle with the spiritual meaning of fire in this symbolic grammar. Fire is ambivalent. It destroys that which cannot be reformed, but it also refines what is genuine. In the prophetic reading, the blaze uncovers falsehoods, counterfeit currency, hypocrisy in leadership, and the hidden relationships that sustain injustice. Fire can purge, yes, but it can also leave skeletons exposed. Our spiritual task is to let revelation lead us to repair rather than to revenge. We should pray for truth to be revealed, and for the courage to respond with justice and mercy when it is. It's important to emphasize here a theological caution. Blending Hermetic symbolism with Christian motifs risks confusion if not anchored to clear ethics. If you are reading symbols through a Christian lens, remember that ultimate hope in that tradition rests not in power dynamics, but in service, in sacrifice, and in transforming love. Use that grounding to resist the temptation to transfer salvific expectation onto any human figure, lion or otherwise. As we approach the possible crucible of 2026, imagine yourself at a forked road. On one path, fear and reactivity dominate. People choose walls. They double down on polarization. They let transactions replace relationships and institutions fray. On the other path, small acts of courage and care define the landscape. Neighbors share resources. Individuals refuse to amplify lies. Leaders are held accountable gently but firmly. Communities mobilize to protect the vulnerable. The difference between these paths is not determined by a single election or by a single public figure. It is determined by countless small acts of conscience. We should also speak about leadership honestly. A catalytic leader, lion-like, charismatic, can expose corruption and sloth. Such a leader can also exacerbate divisions and ego-driven policy. The prophetic frame suggests that figures catalyze revelation. They pull the curtain, but revelation does not equal approval. A catalyst may expose rot in a system, but the remedy is communal, not merely the substitution of one human monarch for another. Whoever the leader is in the public eye, the ethical question for citizens is this: are we going to use the moment to demand accountability and build institutions that serve everyone? Or are we going to trade civic health for theatrical dominance? There is a political humility here that is also spiritual humility. Governments and leaders are tools. People are stewards of one another. The quatrains remind us that leaders can be mirrors. They show what a society already contains. A return of a lion-like figure reveals a pride's appetite for dominance or protection. If a culture is prepped to give its ego away to a figure, the lion will succeed in absorbing loyalty. If a culture chooses restraint, accountability, and mutuality, the same figure will be checked and redirected. Part of the practical work is narrative hygiene. Be careful about what stories you accept and spread. In a year when fire exposes counterfeit, misinformation spreads like dry brush. Verify before amplifying. Pause before you forward a thread that stokes panic or demonizes a neighbor. Remember that rumors are social toxins. Their proliferation damages the fabric of trust we will need in any scenario. Another practical measure is to strengthen cross-institutional relationships that are often overlooked. Churches, civic groups, local schools, and non-profit networks are the scaffolding of civic health. Help them sustain operations now so they are ready to serve in hard times. Volunteer, contribute when you can, and advocate for policies that shore up public goods. Community clinics, food distribution programs, and emergency response infrastructure. At the same time, guard your spiritual life. If the prophetic reading is right, that 2026 could be a year of intense exposure, you will need interior resources. Find rhythms that grant perspective, regular rest, disciplined prayer or meditation, and relationships that provide honest feedback about spiritual pride. The lion's energy tempts leaders and followers alike into self-glorification. Keep alive the practice of confession, not only in a religious sense, but as a means of naming selfishness and making reparation. There is moral imagination to cultivate. Suppose 2026 reveals frauds, fails, and frayed promises. The imagination of renewal sees small beginnings, community gardens that become food hubs, local currencies, or time-banking systems that restore exchange, neighborhood clinics that offer sliding-scale services, and cooperative enterprises that redistribute wealth through shared ownership. These are not utopian fantasies. They are repeatable, time-tested practices that emerge when larger systems stumble. Begin now to learn what these look like in your context and to seed them modestly. We also need to speak frankly about fear and anger. Both are legitimate human responses to instability, but they are morally neutral until chosen. Fear can become prudence or paranoia. Anger can catalyze justice or become cruelty. The spiritual work is to transform fear into clear-eyed vigilance and anger into constructive resistance. That requires practice, an intentional pause, a deliberate choice to redirect energy into tangible help, and the discipline to seek out factual grounding. There are civic actions that are appropriate for every citizen in a strained year. Show up at local meetings, vote with knowledge of local impacts, support community pillars, and hold elected officials to account through lawful means. Avoid the kind of rhetoric that treats public servants as enemies and neighbors as threats. Civic responsibility is daily. It is not only loud. Speak up for the common good. Insist on truthful information. Demand fair processes rather than theatrical loyalty. As pressure mounts, leaders will be tempted to exploit fear. Resist reductionist narratives that define the situation as purely the work of an enemy, you or I. Instead, look for systemic causes and solutions. The prophetic images of counterfeit and fire demand structural remedies as much as personal ones: transparency in finance, legal clarity in governance, and ethical oversight of power. Encourage reforms that increase accountability, auditing, legal safeguards, anti-corruption measures, and robust civil society participation. We should also prepare children and young people not by teaching panic, but by cultivating competence and moral imagination. Teach them basic household economics, the history of civic institutions, and the practice of neighborly care. Equip them to know how to seek help and to give it. Young people who have practiced civic friendship will be the scaffolding of any positive timeline. Now, in the spirit of urgency with hope, here is a compact checklist of action for individuals who want to be part of the awakening timeline rather than the collapse one. Center your identity in durable values. Invest in neighborly networks. Learn transferable practical skills. Practice disciplined consumption and financial prudence. Hold leaders and institutions accountable through lawful civic engagement. Avoid amplifying divisive narratives and commit to regular spiritual or reflective practices that cultivate humility and compassion. Each step seems small. Together, they form the pathway through fire into renewal. As we look to the climax of possibility in 2026, let us return to the central image, the crucible. A crucible is not merely a place of destruction. It is where impure elements are burned away to reveal what can be refined. The quatrains, when read as symbol rather than sentence, suggest that the year may function as such a crucible for nation and soul. The choice before us is not whether a leader returns or whether institutions change. Those things may happen irrespective of choice. The choice is how we respond. Will we be builders of bridges that carry people across the ravine, or will we be walls that block passage and deepen separation? If you choose to be a bridge, your practice will be patient, creative, and grounded in service. You will refuse scapegoating, invest in truth-telling, and be willing to bear small costs for the sake of communal repair. If you choose to be a wall, the temptation is to protect yourself by excluding others, to amplify fear as armor, and to mistake isolation for safety. The prophetic reading asks each of us to choose. A final word about public figures. The lion archetype is useful for understanding patterns. It is not an altar. Leaders can be useful, harmful, or both. The task is to hold them accountable within institutions that reflect the common good. Remember that a leader's return is often a symptom of a larger cultural thirst, an appetite for certainty, for belonging, for quick fixes. Do not feed that hunger with unexamined devotion. Instead, cultivate deep commitments to neighbor love, to truth, and to justice. Those commitments will outlast any political season. If 2026 becomes the year the quatrains hint at, know this: you are not powerless. Small acts accumulate. The story told by the symbols can be rewritten by collective moral courage. There is no promise that the road will be easy. There is a promise buried in faith and human solidarity, that endurance, compassion, and wise action mend more than brittle certainty ever could. May you have eyes to see what needs exposing and the courage to repair. May you have the patience to build local webs of support and the humility to place truth above spectacle. May your practice be steady, your conversations bridge-making, and your hands busy with neighbor care. Remember, prophecies point to pressure, and pressure calls for response. If this reflection has stirred you, share it with someone who needs to hear a sober, hope-tinged perspective about the year ahead. Leave your thoughts below. How are you preparing? What bridges are you building? And what questions still sit heavy in your heart? Your comments matter because together we test which timeline will take shape. In closing, hold this headline kindly. Nostradamus warned Trump's unbelievable destiny for 2026. Let it be a provocation to thought, not a verdict on destiny. May we use the provocation to choose wisely. Go in peace, with steady hearts and practical hands.